I'm going to get rid of this Twitter wall. So, welcome to Social Media Club Auckland podcasting. First time we've done anything on podcasting here. Who here listens to podcasts? Just curious. Cool, most of you. Who has no idea anything about podcasting and just turned up because they... Get out. Thanks for coming.
Just jokes.
Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to introduce, I'll get these guys to introduce themselves. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself? Quickly, what do you do?
Sure. I'm Paul Spain. I've been producing the New Zealand Tech podcast for close to 5 years. When we launched in 2011, we went to the top of iTunes after our third episode, and since that time been working on building up a network of podcasts. So in the last year we've launched Podcast New Zealand as a platform, and Will is the newest to join our network, and he can fill you in on that. And we'll probably give a mention at the end. We're just working on putting together the first podcasting conference for the Asia Pacific region.
Nice, so that's cool. And obviously, at Paul Spain, if you want to follow him on Twitter or ask him questions that you don't feel comfortable asking him here, because it's nobody will see it on Twitter. Right, so we've got Will.
Hey folks, man, this is horrible. This is the whole reason I started a podcast, so I didn't have to do this. I feel like I just want to turn around and read my bio. So, like Paul said, podcasting, it's cool, it's new. Hopefully everyone in this room, we're all at the start of something cool. Why did I get into podcasting? That's a good question.
We'll get into that.
Okay.
But just
cool.
What do you do?
My job sounds cool, and it also sounds not cool. My regular day job is a studio director for a shopping channel, so half of it's cool, the other half is, thank you, boss. And I'm an everyday joker. I'm married, I have kids, and this whole podcasting is my hobby at the moment. So.
And what's your podcast?
Our podcast is called mykiwilife.com. You can find it. Only 3 episodes in, still developing what it's about, but it's a little bit about life. If you're a bit like me and you've kind of got enough money to afford living, what's the next step? So that's what I'm doing. I'm getting awesome guests to come in who have a story, and hopefully together we'll try and work out the meaning of it all. I don't know.
And I want to thank Will for dressing up tonight.
Thank you. Hashtag homeless.
Don't come in the road. Not in the road.
I can't say that. I'll edit it up.
But and I will say, Will's 3 episodes into My Kiwi Life, but he has been podcasting under other brands for 2 years? 3 years?
1 year.
Over a year.
I went fishing. I had a geek podcast, a dad podcast, an interview show, a quiz show.
Yeah.
And I'm still married. So.
All right, and Sarah.
Oh, thanks very much for having me, Chris, and also the Social Media Club Auckland. Thank you for having me. I'm a businesswoman who loves her business and loves her family. I listen to podcasts, and I hear entrepreneurs mention their family, and basically wasn't the next question, right? But I could tell that they loved their family, and I just wanted to give them a chance to share more about their family side of things as well. A bit nervous here today, but that's okay. So I was cheeky enough to ask some high-profile people, and some of them were generous enough to say yes. So that was pretty awesome. And while I was my 1.5 years of podcasting, I had over 100 USA reviews, which is a lot to do with a lot of hustle and a lot of working together with other podcasters and podcast communities, which was awesome. And my initial guests were through contacts that I already knew, through our self-publishing of our books. And then, so we had some amazing people like angel investor Dave Moskovitz, Anna Streeton, Rod Jury, and like family people like Diane Levy, which is awesome. In USA people, I had people like best-selling authors like Hal Elrod and Miracle Morning, and Joshua Becker, who've written Simplify, and some Pilates guru, Riel Isakowitz, Kristen Rutherford, who is the writer of The Nerdist, and some comedians like Mike Furman and between it. That
to an audience, you know, you're just talking to a microphone, it's easy. So good on you guys for coming along today. So there's me. So I do the Chris and Sam podcast with my mate Sam. Wave your hand, there you go, Sam, the pumpkin guy. So we've got the Chris and Sam podcast, and then that's been going just over a year now, and it's just us talking crap, so, you know, I don't expect you to listen to it, I just have fun doing it. And then we've got the NZ Filmmakers podcast. That's following my journey with filmmaking because I'm sort of new to all of that and learning a lot. And there's a lot of people interested in that. Maybe nobody in this room, but there is an audience for it, so we do that as well. And so that's me and the Twitter handles and all that stuff there.
Started with my SingStar microphones that I stole from my children. I realised they had a USB and that went into my computer, and I worked out through Googling, Audacity, could record stuff. And so I would email a guest, and the good thing about living in New Zealand is they're accessible. So I thought, who do I want to start with? Did a quick internet trawl. smcakl came up, so I thought, I'll give him a go. And then the classic DIY thing where, Kiwi can-do attitude, and then you're booked in to go and meet him. So I was standing in Greyland Park with my backpack, SingStar microphones in, and looking dodgy, it was next to a kids park, and I'm standing there looking similar to how I am now. Anyway, Oscar turns up with a two-wheeler from Shortland Street, that lady, and so I'm blown away, and I'm like, what's going on? We sit down on the bench, and then I push record, and it's at that moment where it was a little bit fight or flight, I was still childhood like. Was it a regular Kiwi childhood? He said I was born in Samoa. But it was cool. He was gentle with me, and he said, "Use your words, Will." And I still battle with that today. But I guess the thing for podcast is I was listening to a lot of the American podcasts. Your classics, Mark Maron, Nerdist, and they were just conversations. And when I looked here, I didn't really see anyone doing that. I thought in my mind the closest thing was John Campbell. But if you are lucky enough to meet John, you realise he's as cool off TV with how he just talks as to on TV, and I'm like, I want to meet both sides. So I didn't see anyone doing it. I thought I'll give it a go. Not sure why, but it's just it's a nice hobby. That's kind of how it is. I don't think there was a huge method to it, but I'm happy where it's going.
That's a good one. Sarah?
Well, it's a great way to talk to an amazing person for like half an hour. I mean, if I rang up or sent an email to Rod Jury, do you think he'd say yes to me? I mean, I'm a stay-at-home mum. Yes, I've done some amazing things, but basically that's what I am. And it's like, so a podcast gives you a platform which gives you a reason to contact someone and a reason for them to talk to you, basically, because they're not only just talking to one person. A podcast reaches hundreds, if not thousands of people. So it's a really amazing tool that can be used, and especially for marketing as well. if you've got a brand or a product already, it's a way for you to step up in your industry and become the person, the profile that people think of when they think of that product or service, because you're out there, you're in people's ears, they get to know you, and yeah, it's something special.
Cool. And great answer.
Well, for me, I guess it comes back to, first of all, why I listen to podcasts. And I was living out in West Auckland, had a commute into the city each day. And so I had what was an hour of time that I could listen to the radio, listen to some music, or maybe actually just turn my car into a mobile university, which is really what I did. And so I was really getting inspired by a lot of great content as I was driving to work, heading home. And it sort of dawned on me that most of the content that you hear here in New Zealand is coming from a long way away. Most of it's from the US. Yeah, there's some good content from the UK and other places, but there was very little that I'd come across that was happening locally. And I gave a little bit of thought and wasn't really sure how to get started. And then actually a meeting just next door at the cafe here with a guy from Microsoft who said to me, would you like to start a podcast? And it's like, well, yeah, actually, I would. This guy, Brad Bale. So we started out the New Zealand Tech podcast together. Another guy, Skip Parker, joined us soon after. And what I quickly found was it was a really fun sort of just social outlet to get together with friends, talk about the things that I enjoyed. And then very quickly we realised actually there's a real audience for good local and relevant content, and I guess that's where things started. But there's a lot more depth, I guess, you could go into there. But we'll just keep moving through the questions.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I like Sarah's answer about being a platform, because I would have used the word excuse. It's an excuse for me to meet some people. So particularly with the New Zealand Filmmakers podcast, I want to meet these directors and other people in film, some actors and bits and pieces to learn more about how to do stuff. Same thing. There's no way they would just let me rock up and talk to them, except for Harley here, he's cool. But I was like, no, I'll start a podcast and I'll start interviewing these people. And so I've managed to interview a few good directors and actors, great actors, and that's building up, and we'll see where that goes. So it is a good way of getting across to other people. And the other thing is that you've mentioned is the New Zealand thing. There isn't a lot of New Zealand content. Who here listens to New Zealand content on podcasts? Just curious. So not that many. Remember how many hands went up for podcasts in general? Many. And it's a funny thing, when we started doing the Chris and Sam podcast, we had a couple of people contacted us on Twitter, and they're like, it's so weird hearing a New Zealander coming through the wireless like that. It's like the cringe factor of the New Zealand accent, apparently. So that's interesting. And I wonder if that's a bit of a hurdle coming up. So what I want to ask the next question, we'll start with Sarah, and we'll keep going around this way, is around trends. So I know you've been to the States and that sort of thing, but before we go through that, what trends here and what trends with New Zealand, if you've got anything on
Paul
that?
is probably more suited to talk about. Sorry, I think Paul is probably more suited to talk about New Zealand trends,
Yep.
but I can talk about the
Okay.
podcast movement, if that's okay. I went to podcast movement, and so did Paul, over in Dallas. It was fantastic, and so a good thing that came out was storytelling, which is, as social media experts here, you'll be very familiar with that, and it's just in podcasting as well. If you tell a story, it's a bit more easier to go through. But I did write a lot of notes, but I'm not going to read them all. I'm just going to choose a couple of points from three key speakers. So Roman Mars from 99% Invisible Architecture. A few things he said was serve your audience, make the thing that makes you happy. But production is the key, and edit, and then edit again, because he spends about 6 weeks on one episode, so that's a lot of time that goes into making some quality work there. Next person up that stands out to me is John Lee Dumas. If you're familiar with him or not familiar with him, he earns quite a lot of money, probably $250,000 a month. doing this podcasting thing, which is a ridiculously amount of money. And so he's certainly someone to listen out for. And some of his advice was start, have a unique value, something different that you can offer people, but also there is an abundance, you know. Don't worry about competition in the industry. There is enough room for everybody. Like, podcast episodes are only like half an hour at the most, maybe an hour long. You know, someone who's listening to something might listen to a podcast and think, oh, I want to listen to something else, you know. So there doesn't need to be too much competition worried about that, which I really loved. And I always say his name wrong. How do you say his name?
Mark Maron.
Mark Maron, thank you. I just don't want to say. I always think of another one. Anyway, so he is a great storyteller, and he just said allow people their space. So when you're in a conversation with people, sometimes it's good just to hold and just let them carry on with what they're talking about, even if you think, oh, I've got to get through this, which is probably something that I failed with a bit. Is just hold, let them feel what they're feeling, and let them go deeper if they'd like to go deeper. So those are some things hot off the press from the podcast movement in the States. But yeah, storytelling is still very important.
When was that?
Sorry?
When was that?
About
was
3
it
months
August?
ago.
Yeah, end of July, early August, yeah.
Can I ask a question about the podcasting and the 200,000?
A month, yeah.
Where did that revenue come from?
Well, it comes from a lot of... Well, he has lots of communities and he has lots of services as well. So if you just Google John Lee Dumas, you will see what he's up to with Entrepreneur on Fire. He has a mentoring or coaching program where he helps people. He just is always offering more products. Webinar on Fire. You know, he's a very hard worker. He does a podcast every day of the week.
Yeah.
So he provides a lot of value. Yeah,
Yeah,
people
very
seem to want to
prolific.
buy. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Mark Maron, who listens to Mark Maron here? So he's probably one of the best interviewers, and of course this is trending because Barack Obama says, I want you to interview me on your podcast. So he said, okay, but it's in my garage at my house. And so these guys will probably tell the story because they were there when he was telling the story. I wasn't. I saw it online. But basically they had to get the Secret Service up his street, and his neighbour who didn't like him before suddenly is his best mate, and the president rolls up and does the interview in the garage. So pretty cool.
The funny thing about the garage thing is I thought that would be a good idea for my podcast but I emailed Oscar and I said, hey, would you like to come to my garage to do a podcast? And he was like, we'll meet at Grayland Park. Okay, bud. See you there on Saturday.
I think you've got to be famous before you take them to your
Well,
garage.
you know, we're developing. True that, thank you.
Can
We'll
now.
talk
Say that
after this.
now.
Great advice.
Paul, both New Zealand and overseas.
Yeah, I guess something that I've personally been involved in, and I think as a growing trend, is the increase of podcast networks and their importance. So when you look at most of the big major content, it tends to either be coming through. If we look at the US, there's Twit Network for tech and varying other ones. You've got NPR, National Public Broadcasting there. So there are these networks that often are bringing a lot of the very best content, and we're seeing that it's just starting to happen in New Zealand. So for instance, Radio New Zealand here have just launched a podcast with John Campbell, and of course they've got the funding to put in and do some really good quality production. There was the mention of Roman Mars and spending 6 weeks in producing one podcast. You've got to have a pretty massive audience if you're going to do that, and very hard to do that without a growing network around you. And so that's what we're seeing. A lot of these networks are evolving. When Will and I got talking, he'd been podcasting for a year. and then he came on to work with us with Podcast New Zealand, and I think within 2 or 3 days the podcast was in the top 10 on iTunes in New Zealand, because we had that sort of network effect, that reach of already talking to podcasters. So that's definitely one of the big things I think we're seeing. But there are all sorts of approaches, and it's not that there's just a one size fits all. So that's just one thing that I've picked up and have been involved in.
Can I ask you another question on that too? So podcasting can be video or audio. Most of the podcasting we tend to, when I talk about it, I'm thinking audio. So do you think there's going to be more video, or about the same, or what's your thought on that?
Well, I think what I've seen from American podcasts that I've been on, and some of those they've got big reach, hundreds of thousands of listeners, and also a video element to them, is they manage to work in the video but without making it too focused on video. And it tends to be, in most cases with podcasts, people are consuming them when they've got that time, they're doing something else, but they can consume that long format content. So when I talked about my commute and I had an hour a day, that's a really easy time for me to consume content. But would I consume that same content in video form? Well, probably not while I'm driving. I might not be driving for too much longer. And whether I would consume that same content on my TV or through another mechanism, not so much. But there is a percentage of the audience that are into it. And if you look at, I guess, at what the trends that we see around YouTubers and so on, the sort of content that's traditionally down there tends to be shorter form, and the audio, I think, will always probably consume more of the audience than the video side with the long form content.
Yeah, one of my favourites, Fighter and the Kid, do a video and it's just the highlights of the audio. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot more sense. Will, anything on trends?
Wow, trends. Look at me, I'm the wrong person for trends. A point that I kind of thought about was this idea of audio. I like audio only because, say if you have a guest, you can imagine how you remember them if you're aware of them. So I heard one the other day with who's the guy from Evil Dead? Ash, is it? Or the actual,
Bruce.
Points. Free drink for you outside. Pizza's gone.
Will shouting.
What was I saying? Thank you for that.
Bruce Campbell.
Yeah. I was imagining him from the old movies.
The original one.
And I enjoyed that. When you see him now, their age takes its toll, and that's cool. I'm okay with that. But I want to imagine that, and that's the power of audio, right? When someone's telling you a story, you're imagining, and that's, I think, what
How dare he get older in 30 years?
I know.
How dare he do that?
And also, some faces are better for audio.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm married. I got married very early.
Yeah, no comment here. And welcome to you at home in the live stream. We see your tweets up there, so good for tuning in. Because they're out of Auckland, because not everybody lives here, just saying. So that's cool. All right, so what I want to ask now is maybe a leading question. So I want to get your idea on sponsorship. Sponsorship is really important to podcasts if this is going to be, as a movement, grow, because it actually takes quite a bit of money, time, etc., to get these things going. And there are a few reasons that podcasts are a good thing for sponsors to jump on board. One of the main things is if it's an evergreen content. So if it's an interview with somebody, for example, I interview a director who's up and coming, particularly in 3 years' time when they start hitting it big, if they do, people will be Googling them, potentially find that podcast, and that sponsor is embedded in that podcast forever. It's not Google's AdWord that is there once or so many impressions and then gone. Once it's embedded in that podcast, it's there as long as the podcast is there. So there are a few different ways of doing sponsorship. I'll start with Paul this time. What do you think is the best way, and why do you think sponsors should sponsor or help out with podcasting?
I don't think there's a best way. I think it will vary according to the type of podcast. one of the reasons why sponsorship works well with podcasts is that the audience gets a connection with the host. If someone listens and keeps listening to a podcast, and you're listening to somebody for maybe half an hour or an hour a week, you get to know them quite well, and you probably give some credence to their opinion on whatever it is that they're talking about. So in that sort of situation, if you're talking about a brand, giving mentions around a product, then that really carries a lot of weight, because people are listening to you because you're the expert in a particular field, and if you're talking about a product in that space, then you're likely to get quite a strong uptake. In terms of some of the varying models, one thing that was discussed at this conference in the US was around the sort of CPM rates for podcast sponsorships. And some of these rates in the US were so low that, if you look at, add together all the podcasts in New Zealand, the revenue at those sort of sponsorship levels would be absolutely minuscule. But the reason being is these are podcasts like Serial, big podcasts with big listenerships that are very generic. So if you've got a podcast that isn't focused on a niche, then the value to the advertiser is going to be much lower. But the recommendation, these days is to be producing a podcast that focuses on a niche, as most people would do if they're blogging or talking about anything through social channels. And if you do that, then even a small audience can be really, really valuable.
Yeah.
And we've certainly had some good sponsorships through on a number of our podcasts.
And just to give you some context to that, so Serial is, I think, it's the biggest podcast in history. Is that right?
So
and it was 5 million downloads an episode on average.
94.4 million downloads was the total when Sarah Koenig spoke at the conference.
Wow.
Which is more than a lot of TV programs.
So if you're only getting cent per download, you're doing okay. Pretty good.
That's
Whereas,
true.
I wouldn't be doing that good. Okay. Well,
Well, it makes you worry here with our population. That's the question I
it's a
came here to work
It's
out.
a global audience.
Yeah.
Half our audience are in
Half the
Canada.
time I think they won't understand what we're talking about, but I try and cut my bros and churs, but actually I really want to know how that's going to work. What I do know is that it would be cool if this was my job, to go and talk to people, like we've mentioned, great way to network. Look, we're all here tonight. But I just hope maybe it's one company who says, hey, I like your podcast, the niche podcast. I'm struggling where life fits into that. I'm open. But I imagine it would be the following, and you have a listenership, and then you would take that to a company, maybe. I hope that's the way.
So you need a life insurance company, that's what you need.
Yeah, I'll do those
It's all about
ads.
life. So I plugged you online there.
I hope someone's kind of worked it out. Because that's an interesting one. But I'm also okay if it's just a hobby, because it's a good hobby.
Yep.
Can I add something else?
Yep.
Just in there? This is something that we've been battling with sort of building a network, and I guess one of the things that we've decided is once we've actually got a reasonable catalogue of content, then it's actually more worthwhile going out and spending that time trying to monetize it rather than the effort to monetize one single podcast. It's a lot of effort. So we're certainly hopeful that the network effect will help a little bit there. And from what we've seen in the US, that's quite common. Once you build up those networks, becomes a little bit easier to monetize too.
And there's a breakthrough effect. So the more podcasts become mainstream and more people are sponsoring them, more likely they will. Just like advertising online, when that first started out and there were banner ads, there wasn't very many people doing that. And then it came up and up. So it'll be the same sort of thing as well. I'll ask Sarah this question first. Same question. So
Does she want a sponsor? Do you want a sponsor?
Oh, no, that's
Then
right. You
can
started
jump
with
in
trending.
queue.
Sorry. She already started with that. What was the question?
I just wanted to ask, where do you school, so is it YouTube or where do you school your pods so people can go?
So podcasting, the audio podcasts are all online. Usually you go to their website, but if you're in iTunes, if you're in the Apple sphere, iTunes has pretty much everything. You can find it through that. If you're on Android, I like Pocket Cast, which is a paid app, but it's a free app called Stitcher, which pretty much has everything. And there's a bunch of other free ones as well. Most people tend to listen to the podcast these days on their mobile or similar portable device. And so, yeah, iTunes is definitely the most preferred. And also, everybody rates on iTunes and all the rest of it. I don't have iTunes, I don't have Apple products, so I haven't rated any of these guys' shows. Yes? If you want to start a podcast on business to business, you're quite welcome to do so. I'm sure there are podcasts that do it, but I don't know that we have any at the moment. In your network, have you got any business to business?
So we've got the New Zealand Business Podcast where we speak to business leaders and hear their stories. That one's been a little bit slower with episodes recently, but we've got a bit more content coming through. We've got 2 episodes recorded and ready to go over the next few weeks. So
cool.
And that's across a whole mix of businesses. So anywhere where we find someone that's interesting, some good stories to tell about business, then we want to talk to them and see if we can fit them in.
Did you have a specific idea of a business to business podcast? Was that? Yeah. So, are you a consultant in that area? Yes. Okay, so for you, and for anybody who's involved in consulting or anything like that, we've got a personal brand, and personal brand was the next question, so it's a good segue, is find a podcast that deals with that sphere of thing, and then get hold of the podcaster. They will always have their Twitter handle or email or whatever on their website and say, do you need a guest? I speak about this. This is my info, your book, your whatever you do. And I'm pretty sure there's very few podcasters that'll go, no, we've got too many guests, right? So particularly in New Zealand at the moment, I would say. So it is really a good way to get in there. And one of the reasons you want to be very careful about your selection of the podcast. You want to listen to a few, you want to go on their website, you want to see if there's any comments, if they have social channels, how much interaction there is, make sure they're a good fit for you, and then do that. Because what you're doing is you're leveraging, as I think Will said earlier, the trust, or Paul said, the trust that's been built up with their audience. So you get in there and you're sort of a guest, you've been invited to this person's home, the audience's home, through this person they trust. And it's a great way to improve your standing and get known. And you can then say, oh, this is the podcast. You throw out the URL to your listeners, and they can or your followers in whatever social media you've got, and they can go and listen to that, and they'll see a different side of you. And a good interviewer will get more out of you than you get in front of a microphone and trying to talk yourself. You know what I mean? And so if you find a good interviewer, it'll make a big difference to your business. So,
Chris, I actually have a different perspective of sponsorship, and I think it is relevant to you as well. I acknowledged when I launched mine that mine is a hobby podcast, The Parentalist, and I knew that there wouldn't be much market for earning money in the area. But I do believe that another way of looking at it is if you've got a product or service that you provide and you can interview people in the same industry, and people who are in the industry would be interested to know how other people are doing things, on the other side of the world or the other side of the country, and then you can build your own network and do really well. So there's no reason why you can't start your own. One of the questions that we're going to come up is how do you set up your podcast? I set mine up the cheapest way possible, so there's no reason why you can't do it too. Yeah. Yeah,
I'm sorry, Sarah, I missed you out on the sponsorship. It's my fault. Naughty. All right. Okay, so do you want to carry on with personal brand, Sarah?
Personal brand. Oh.
So whether it's as a guest or whether it's as doing your own podcast.
Well, as we just mentioned just now, it is an excellent way to enhance your personal brand. You know, it's a great way to get your name out there. You might be an unknown person like myself who got to speak with some amazing people, and look, here I am. You know, what was I doing this morning? Making sure the house was tidy, almost going to an athletics day. It was cancelled out, and and this kind of thing. And like, here I am right now, you know, and podcasting has given me this opportunity. And so it gives you opportunities in your professional life, but it also connects you with people all over the world. I was one of the first members in Podcasters Paradise. There's over 2,000 members throughout the world in there, and it's just incredible. There's something else that, and it's also it's a free way of giving content, you know, to add more value to your existing customers or to try and attract more customers, add it to your marketing plan. And yeah, I just think it's a great way to get yourself out there, get your brand out there. Yeah, it's good.
Paul? Personal brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are somebody that enjoys producing content, you enjoy sharing that, then podcasting is definitely, you know, a great way to do that. And if what you're doing is good, then you know, naturally that will help grow your personal brand. You know, for me, I started out doing a little bit of blogging, which was really just an extension of emails that I sent to my staff at work. I'd be putting things together and educating them about varying things that were of interest to me, and then I thought, oh, I could give this away to a slightly bigger audience that might be good brand-wise. Started blogging. The next thing was, you know, doing the same with podcasting, and for me that opened up opportunities in terms of doing TV, radio, you know, other podcasts. So you know, that wouldn't have come about if I hadn't have got into doing the podcasts to start with, because that gave me a little bit of a platform. And then when you talk to people, they're like, oh, you're the host of that podcast, right? Well, you must know a little bit about technology or business or whatever it is. And so it's definitely helped. So if you can find that space where you can podcast, or a podcast you can get involved in your niche, then it is definitely a great way of exposing your personal brand and your business.
Yeah. Well,
these are very formal answers. I don't know. I keep it a little bit more simple. I just think one, it's a good way to meet people that you can't normally meet. So that's cool. That's ticking the right box for me. It's fun to talk to people. So again, if you could do it for a job, that'd be cool. And I think it makes you a better speaker. Not, you know, just through. It's a bit weird in this room because there's people. Yeah. I look down. I'm way better like this, but personal brand. I don't really know. It's weird putting yourself out there. That's not something that I never thought was on the cards. And you know, for others to share and know you, I don't know what that means. How much, you know, there's no school on podcasting with how much to put out there.
Yeah.
Do really successful, well-known people have a rule book where they never mention this? You know, I don't know. You're talking for 35 minutes and you dry up because we're not professionals yet. Yeah. And so you just talk. But I feel like the main thing is, if you've got a co-host, that's cool. I don't have a co-host, so the guest is my co-host. Surely it's my job to get them talking. Yeah. And what I find is that these are busy people. These are people who have spent a career making sure others are okay. So they don't mind talking about themselves. And it's nice for them. And if you can kind of get them to open up, to know that it's a safe environment, then I mean, I don't know if I should be getting them to sign a bit of paper to say, you know, if you go on TV, you sign a bit of paper, and you don't get your
guests to sign.
Should I be?
I do.
So again, it's just a hobby, you know. And if it turns out to something more, cool. Yeah. It certainly helped me. This is live. I probably shouldn't say I went for a job interview. Maybe a friend of mine went for a job interview, and I sat there talking, and I went into podcast mode. You know, they're like, "Will, tell me about yourself." I was like, "Oh, yeah, man, I'm a 35-year-old guy. I got some family, you know, work." No, I didn't say that. Yeah, I did actually. But those are the kind of personal I don't know if I'm answering your question, Paul.
That's right. So yeah,
Not Paul.
from a personal branding point of view, I do want to stress the fact that if you do want to leverage and make the most out of podcasting, you don't have to go to the whole end of getting all the equipment, doing all that, learning how to upload it, and do all that sort of thing. If you don't want to, if you do want to, great, do it. It's great. It's not that hard. But if you don't want to go to that, you could. I'm quite confident to say, depending on your niche, your specific knowledge, you could go on a different podcast every week for a year and be interviewed by somebody, you know, and you would have all that sort of reach. It would actually be a bigger reach because you're using different audiences every week. You know, you're hitting different people, and it is global. The Chris and Sam podcast, half of our listeners, I think, Sam will know because he knows all the stats, I don't do any real work, half of our listeners are from Canada. I don't know why, I have no idea, but that's just the way it is. So, yes, Dave.
The question that I have, which is still eluding me, having not actually podcast and not actually having YouTube yet, but I'm about to. Please explain to me from your perspective, so I can maybe get an inkling, why you would podcast versus YouTube yourself and do exactly the same thing. Like you're going to have the interview, lots of people do the interviews or do the daily diaries, and we've heard lots of people do it over the years, become sensations, and suddenly 5 million people are watching them, obviously a bigger reach because people search on YouTube. But from a podcasting perspective, why podcast versus YouTube, or why YouTube versus podcast?
You know, I almost want to ask somebody who's in the audience the answer to this. Because you listen to it in the car. But I was going to say, because Guy and Harley are filmmakers, they have got one of the biggest YouTube channels of anybody I know anyway, in New Zealand. And they do a podcast as well. Can I borrow the mic? This is off script. I don't know which one of you want to talk. So, why do an audio podcast as well as all your YouTube stuff?
I think that the trick is to try and do both, because with the YouTube you can monetize it a lot easier, but obviously with the podcast you're making it available to people so they can listen when they're driving or at the gym, for example. You're not going to be watching YouTube videos at the gym. So I think the trick is to try and do both. And that's what we do. We upload all of our podcasts every week to YouTube as well, and we get less listeners on YouTube, but it's still a little bit more traffic for us, a slightly different audience, and a little bit more exposure.
So when you upload them with like a slideshow or just a static image?
Yeah, so the ideal way to do it would be to record your podcast as a video each week as you record the audio, set up a camera as well. But if you haven't set that up, which we haven't, I just basically edit together a slideshow of various photos of Guy and myself over the years making our films and use that. Yep. But I intend to change that. Ideally, I think what you'd do is you would record your podcast while streaming it live on YouTube, and then upload the YouTube video as a YouTube video afterwards. So you're covering all your bases basically. Yeah,
and that's what some of the big networks over in the States do. Thank you for that. Give them. Excellent. Yeah. So, but we'll go back to our panel with that question.
Harley.
So, do you have any comments on YouTube versus?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit of both, and I think there's no reason why you shouldn't do both. It gives you a broader reach. You hit a different audience. I have to say, I got very lazy once I started doing things with TV3, and I realised that's easier than me going through rigmarole of producing quality content that can take a lot of time while it's up to the studio. No, I didn't have to sign anything, yeah, it's kind of done, but I definitely think taking both approaches can work, and it just depends on the content you're producing, what you find it's a better fit for. So it tends to be shorter form is better for YouTube in my opinion in most cases, but there are a number of ways of attacking that.
Yeah, Sarah?
I actually, when I first started, I interviewed on Skype, which I did, and I would video it, so I'd video them, video me, But I actually found the audio quality wasn't as good using Skype with the video. And so, you know, most of the consuming was people listened to my podcast more than they looked on the YouTube. So I thought, well, if they're going to listen, I want the audio to be really good. And so for that to happen, I need not to do the video as well. So that was what I chose.
Yep. Anything to add there, Will?
Yeah. I was looking at YouTube, and I just felt like podcast, like for me, blogging was taken, YouTube was taken. There was already cool stuff out there, and the only thing I could see that wasn't a market covered was podcasting. So that's kind of, and also it's easier for me. You know, I do a lot of my stuff around lunchtime, work hours.
I was going to say, you
after
work at a studio, so it'd be like going home to work again.
Yeah. I actually, you know, cut all my stuff watching TV, or trying to anyway, and trying to get it done in the evenings, and that helps me rather than managing YouTube. I'd like to in the future, that'd be cool, but maybe more along the line of, I don't know, doing something special with that guest, you know, so have a different type of show. But, you know, again, if there's a bit more time, resource, if this can be the job, then, it's tough enough to come up with 35 minutes of reasonable audio weekly.
Yeah, my opinion on that, my call on that is just that audio is so much easier than video. The editing is so much quicker. Well, it helps that I just give Sam all the editing to do. And all he does really for the Chris and Sam podcast is get rid of all my ums, which takes a couple of hours, and then for a 30-minute podcast, and that's it. So that's pretty easy. So audio is easier. I think it has a deeper penetration. There's more people that will get it, but definitely there's benefit to using video. It adds some spice. They recognise you for a start, and you do come across a little bit better. And it's interesting to see what some of the new platforms will do with that, like Blab and Periscope. I think particularly Blab for that sort of thing would be quite good in the future, but we won't go there. All right, I'm going to change the pace a little bit right now. What's your favourite podcasts that you listen to? Paul?
There's one called Digital Marketing Podcast out of the UK, which I've just listened to for years and years and years. That was probably the first podcast where I heard anyone sort of talking about launching podcasts. And that's been one that I keep going back to. There's a whole bunch of them, but that one
just
probably
2 or 3
that stands
each
out.
might be.
One other one, just for people in business, is called Manager Tools, and it's just really, really great content around management, and well worth, easy to listen to.
Yeah.
Well, I actually like listening to Joyce Meyer. She is a speaker over in the US, and she just tells it like it is and stuff that I need to hear to improve myself. Joel Osteen, he also has inspirational messages that I really appreciate listening to. And Bethel Church and Life Church here in Auckland as well, I enjoy listening to.
Cool. I've been trying to make an effort to listen to some Kiwi ones. Guy and Harley podcast, Fundamental Escape.
Sorry, what was that again?
Fundamental Escape.
Fundamental Escape.
Yeah, all of the ones up here. I like the conversational ones, so I like Nerdist podcast. I feel like I sell out a little bit saying that, but whatever. I'm a fan. Mark Maron, you know, they're pretty good at what they do. So those are my staple ones. I'm a bit like Paul. I've got an hour to get to work, and so that fits in nicely. But I enjoy the Joe Rogan one. It goes for 3 hours, so that'll be 3 days. That gets me through to Wednesday. And it's important that they're entertaining, I think, because it's trying to get you from A to B. And so I remember that. I remember it's not just my yarns and me talking. Hopefully for that person and their travel, either, you know, they're not learning something but engaged. And so my attack is let the guest talk as much as possible. And then I actually have a tough time trying to relate, like bring myself into it. I don't really want to do that, but it must be just a self thing, you know, where
Yeah.
I feel a little bit cheesy or something, especially with a live podcast. But it's a work in progress. But certainly, if you're looking for
So any recommendations? Any other recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, jump on to iTunes and have a look at the top podcasts in New Zealand. That'll give you a good idea. Radio Lab has a good podcast.
He's saying that because his one has just got onto the top 10
That's right.
on iTunes.
Highly recommend My Kiwi Life. A bumbling 35-year-old. But I'd get into Kiwi ones because I think, the click matters, the subscribing matters, and rating and reviewing, I'm still waiting for the public platform that we can all hook each other up. I don't think that's against the law or iTunes law. I've started doing it with the ones I listen to, but we certainly should. We should do it for each other. Because I think the algorithms push you up as well. But that's all science, technical stuff.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, I'm going to give you a few recommendations as well. If you want a good laugh, and it's probably not safe for work, but is The Fighter and the Kid. I do a long drive, from Hamilton to Auckland every now and again. It's The Fighter and the Kid I'll listen to because I'll be pissing myself in the car. So that's a good one. Obviously the Guy and Harley podcast and My Kiwi Life I listen to. I also listen to I Love Marketing with Joe Polish. I really like that. The quality, interestingly enough, sound quality is not that good. I've heard them do a podcast where they're driving in the car and they go through a rain squall and all you can hear is the rain on the windshield for a while. But the content's really good. And School of Greatness with Lewis Howes. I really like that one too. So shout out to those guys. All right, so we're just about finished. We're going to go for some Q&A in a second. While you think about the Q&A, I want some moments. What have you done where you've gone, oh crap, that shouldn't have happened? Or maybe an inspiring moment. So to start you off, I did have the director of a film that I was on come to me. I hadn't seen him for a few days or whatever, a week. And I said, oh, hey, how are you going? You made a mistake. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I had attributed some criticism of a certain film to him, and it wasn't him, it was the guy next to him that said it, and I had to do a retraction the next day. But other than that, it is quite funny. With the Chris and Sam podcast, we're pretty relaxed about it, and if you listen to that, you know more about my life than probably I do. And I bump into people I haven't seen for a while, and they go, oh, so how are you going with blah, 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 blah? I'm like, how did you know about, oh yeah, the podcast, that's right. So what's happened to you? We'll start at the other end again. Well,
I'm trying really hard to think. I'm pretty self-aware when I'm podcasting. So
it's just me then.
Well, I don't want to get into an uncomfortable situation. That's my whole thing, is trying to keep them comfortable. The Oscar Kitely one was interesting. That was first time up.
Yeah.
Just trying to think of some of I've had some pretty cool guests, but the thing that blows me away is they're just normal people. I don't know why I forget things like that. Maybe it's, an 80s child watching movies, and that means a lot, TV and stuff. So when I see someone I recognise, it's very difficult for me to act normal around them.
Oh.
But, no real huge moments. I think I'm okay. I'm going at a reasonable pace for 1 year in, and maybe some areas I could work on is to, if there's a moment, don't let it pass by. I had a guest last night, an Air New Zealand pilot who, his plane crashed, and he was telling me at this part where he was coming up to what he felt like were his last breaths underwater, and he had this feeling that if he just takes one more breath of water in, it'll all be over. And I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to ask next? What? Just let him talk.
Yeah.
The story went on that, on his last breath, the plane popped up and gave him an inch of air. And that was his last breath. That actually air went in. And, straight after that, I didn't know what to follow up with. But because you think you need to jump in.
Yeah.
But you don't, It's just a normal conversation. So, yeah.
That's cool. And you are a good interviewer, I will say that, for the record. So
well, I don't know. Well, I guess
you are.
Long term. Thanks, Mum. Auntie, Jordan.
Sarah, any moments?
Oh, I've got two if I can choose two.
Yep.
One of my first interviews was with Anna Streeton, and I got her name wrong the whole time. I called her Anna the whole time, and she was just so gracious, right? She would, she even had, as part of her interview with me, is, so you get it wrong, so what, you know? And she just so amazing, and she just brought up her name, just, you know, casually during the last part of our interview, and I just thought, wow, this lady, even though I, you know, was offending her potentially, she had enough grace for me, and she was still present and fully there for us.
Sorry.
I missed out on the photo. So that was amazing. And then Rod Jury, my husband had been going on, and, oh, you should interview Rod, you should interview Rod. And we'd sent him a copy of our first book, you see, and so he knew who we were. And so I sent him an email saying, hey, you know, really like what you're doing, congratulations on you who's doing so well. I think he was a finalist in Entrepreneur of the Year for the World or something at the time, or something awesome. And just said, oh, you know, would you like to be on my podcast? He said, yeah, how does Seven sound? It was like 3 or 4 hours later, so I normally prepare an intro by researching the internet, and instead of going logically to their business website, which is Xero, I went to Wikipedia and gathered my intro for him there. And so I did this huge spiel, which I should have just done at least a quarter of, about all these things that amazing Rod had done, and he said, oh, it doesn't sound right. So, oh, sorry. So, what's your greatest joy as a parent? And you know what, he was able to, you know, he brought it up that I'd made a mistake, I apologised, and he moved on, you know, and how awesome is that? You know, people are people. And I personally believe the most successful people are the most generous people that you'll find. So, yeah, there's a couple.
That's great. Paul?
There have been a few moments, but the worst is when you sit a guest down, you record a podcast, maybe you're on the other side of the world and they're someone that whose time is very valuable, they're very well known, and at the end of the podcast you go to hit the stop button on your portable recorder and you look down and you realise, oh, this recorder you've got to press the button twice, not once. I had that happen in the US, and in that particular case it was with one of the sort of top tech journos in the US who talks about Microsoft, Mary Jo Foley, and we were at this conference for a few days, and she was gracious enough to give me another hour further on in the week, and we recorded again, and actually the second time round was much better than the first one anyway, so it worked out. And it happened one other time when we'd just set up our podcast studio in New Zealand and had somebody from TV come in, and we had a slightly similar scenario. So yeah, I've learnt that lesson, and hopefully it doesn't happen again, but once every 100 or so episodes.
Yeah, I also, we learned the lesson of controlling your environment. So my first episode, and it's still in there, of the New Zealand Filmmakers Podcast, I interviewed Julia Reynolds, and I said, I'll interview you wherever you want me to come. And she said, right, well, we've got a studio where they do set design and all the rest of it. So we're out there, and her husband is making sets for the film, banging away, and I was like, can we go into another room? Is it quiet? Oh, this room here, that'll be good. It was a set room. There's no insulation at all. So she went down and said, oh, can you do something else for a while? We'll do this podcast. And it got on really well. And I got her to the point, as an interviewer, I think, you get her right in the story. And she's talking about her daughter and how she'd gone in this film and how she was so proud. And she started to choke up with tears, and she's just about to say this. And the band store started through the middle of it. I was like, damn, don't do that again. So, who has questions for our panel? We've got a microphone that we'll send around.
Sorry, so this one first.
Oh, yes. Well, I said that you'd be first, but you've already asked twice, so.
I was just going to ask, what technology are you using? So if we want to get this started, what's the easiest, cheapest way to get started?
You can be as simple as there are apps on your iPhone. You can talk into your iPhone. I mean, you all know the quality, of the voice through a phone today is very good. You can actually record it that way through to a big sort of studio setup. With our Podcast NZ studio, we've got it set up so we can have 4 concurrent microphones. That's our sort of standard setup, but just depends what suits you. Portable recorder. There's
You can
lots
use
of
an
options
Android
out
too,
there.
just saying. Doesn't have to be an iPhone.
I'd say keep it cheap, keep it free. See what you've got, see what your friends have got. Go with the phone option. It's a good option. The tough bit is, you've got to think about the little jingle song for it if that's what you want, because otherwise you've just got a random piece of audio. But the good thing is there's lots of DIY Google links. YouTube will give you a hand. It's easy. You can borrow my SingStar mics.
Sarah?
Do you want to respond to the...
Thank you.
Just
So what I use is Skype, Adobe Audition, which costs $20 a month. My microphone is an ATR 2100. It's under $200. And I use for headphones, Apple headphones. And so with Adobe Audition and Skype, there's 2 free softwares that I use, Line In and Soundflower. Just download them off the internet, and I do have a spreadsheet because I've made mistakes. Like when I was practice interviewing, I talked with my best friend in Australia, and it's like, I don't know, I can't hear what you're saying, and I had a setting wrong. So if anyone wants to use the option that I've just suggested, email me at sarah@theparentalist.com, and I'm happy to send you this PDF of all my settings, which will save you hours of work. Yeah, no worries.
And I would say, to me, the best way is to record on the phone, download a program called Audacity, it's free, and just edit it in Audacity, because you do want to edit it. If you do an intro, it's often best to do the intro after the interview. And, because you've spoken to them, you know much more about them, and it comes through when you do that. And you do that intro after the thing, edit it to the front of the file, and you're done. So, editing's really good in Audacity. Next question, Dylan, if you can...
Hello. I don't listen to tech podcasts or parenting podcasts, but I do imagine that there's quite a lot of content out there, especially from other countries. So I was wondering what the benefit was of having that New Zealand spin on quite a popular topic.
In terms of tech, really there is quite a difference. If you listen to a US podcast, they tend to assume that the US is the world. So they'll talk about products that are being launched in the US, they'll talk about what telcos in the US are offering in terms of internet plans and what their mobile carriers are doing, products that are getting launched. There's a lot that way. In New Zealand, we've got tech startups here to talk about. We've got products that are maybe getting launched here before the US at times. There's a lot going on with, Vodafones and Sparks, the telcos here that's very relevant to New Zealand, ultra fast broadband initiative, things like that. So I think there's a lot of local stories to tell, whatever the topic is. And Chris with his New Zealand Filmmakers podcast, talking to local people, I think it's great to hear those local stories. Sure, there's lots of US content that maybe will talk to bigger, more famous people, but sometimes the local content is actually much more relevant to us here. So.
When I started The Parentalist, I did my research and there was no other podcast out there that highlighted business and parenting. Since then there has been more, but what we offer as New Zealand is new content. Like, we know people here in New Zealand which people over in America haven't heard. Often in the podcast industry, especially in that community that I am a part of, Podcasters Paradise, what's common is to have people on your show, and often high-profile people in the industry, if they have a new book coming out, some advice that Chris was sharing earlier is to go on as many podcasts as possible. For someone listening to podcasts, and if you're hearing the same person every week, 1 week you hear the same person from all these different podcasts, it gets a bit frustrating and annoying. So this is what we offer. We offer people, for me it was experts in tech and experts in parenting, experts in thing that, whatever, that Americans hadn't heard of. And you know what? They love our accent. They do.
They love an accent more than we do sometimes. Do you want to say anything about that, Will?
It's a good question. I should think about that before I started mine.
You don't have to answer. We can go on to the next question.
I think that there wasn't that many people, and I don't think there are that many people doing long-form interviews with Kiwis. You know, they are on the news, but they'll cut it into a 30-second clip, and they'll overlay it, highly produced. So I want to hear the bits in between, you know. I like a real famous person hearing them cough, because you don't get to ever hear that. I'll make a...
All right, next question.
Yeah, I was just keen to hear you guys talk a little bit about, first of all, how you choose your guests, how you find them or contact them, I guess is good, and your interview style as well. Because I've been podcasting for I think it's almost 5 months, and I'm just totally winging it. I have no idea what I'm doing. It seems to be working out because it's going pretty well.
What's your podcast on?
It's faith and spirituality. So yeah, authors and speakers and different, yeah. And yeah, I've been pretty fortunate in the way I've managed to get people to talk to, but I was just keen to hear you guys talk about, because for me it's mine is a real sort of passion project. It's just and that's the thing I enjoy about it, is that you can say whatever you like. There's no kind of editing in that sense, and it's kind of therapeutic as well. But yeah, I'd be keen just to hear you guys talk about it.
So how do we get interviews? I mean, for you, you've already mentioned there's a lot of authors and that sort of thing. So authors are always happy to talk about their book to somebody, right? So how do you contact them normally? Do you just find them?
Most of them just message them on Facebook or just email them, and eventually they see them. Some people, I just email them again and again until they respond.
Do you interview them on the phone, or do you have to interview them in person?
Skype. I've only done one interview in person, so it's just Skype.
Because you don't want to ask everybody to meet you at the park, because that's don't do that.
This is true. Hey, I've got a great idea of what I started to do is after the interview, if you feel like it's gone quite well with that person, is say, hey, do you know of a person that you would recommend to, for me it was who loves their business and loves their family. And you know what, some people would give me 4 people. Mine was every week, so that's a month already booked up. When I stopped my podcast, because I wanted to invest my time with my family while I was homeschooling in America, I had 8 people I had to contact and say, I'm sorry, but I'm not doing this at the moment. There's no reason, yes, contact people and, go for the big guns, and then it makes the other people in the second and third tier seem a bit more approachable. And I got no's from J.K. Rowling's office, I got no's from is it Melinda Gates' office, and you just try, the worst I can say is no, and I can handle that.
What about your interview, just your interview kind of style, because one of the most popular episodes I did, at the very beginning of the conversation, it was an author, it was a guy, his name's Paul Young, he wrote a book called The Shack, and it, I sort of had all these questions, and then he was I was oh, hopefully we'll just have an organic sort of conversation. And he's well, that's all I know how to have. And I was okay. And then I just kind of just ditched all my questions, and we just started talking, and it's it's had 20,000 plays.
How much prep do you do for an interview?
A little bit like tonight, none.
Yeah.
There you go. And I think, and that comes
but
across...
I don't recommend that for everyone.
Not always, but sometimes that comes across really well, because you don't have a set agenda and you're not leading them down a certain path, and letting them lead the conversation often can go to places... You've got to listen, you've got to dig deeper in certain areas or push them in different ways, but you're much more present if you haven't done too much prep sometimes.
Well,
but it is a personality thing.
I guess my podcast is similar to Will in that sense, and topic-wise, I guess, in sort of going on a bit of a journey, but I would be different in the sense that I do want to put myself into them a little bit more. So that's where I think I don't struggle so much for content, because I'm kind of reflecting with these people and wanting to know what they think about certain ideas and thoughts and stuff like that. So.
I don't think you'd be necessarily interested in the content, but have a listen to the NZ Filmmakers podcast.
You're really selling it to me.
Yeah, no, I know, but you're not a filmmaker, so I don't think it, are you?
No.
So I don't think it, but the way it's done is the interview's there, but it's interspersed with your own dialogue or monologue on interpreting what they did. So if you want to put yourself in, that's another way of doing it. I'm not saying it's the best way to do it, and I copied it off somebody else. Who did we copy it off? Somebody anyway. So, but have a look at different styles if you want to do that. Any other questions? And all the way down the back, Don.
Okay, we were a bit late starting today for a variety of technical reasons. I managed to collect them all, but maybe if we go for another 5 minutes or so, would that suit?
Yep, we'll get these 2 questions at the back. Is there one more question? No, those 2 questions we're done.
Hey guys, quick question for everyone. What was the time frame between having the idea to podcast and actually producing your first podcast?
Mine was pretty quick. Decided on the bus coming home. Ran it past my wife. She said no. So just started. Going to be in trouble because we're late. Yeah, I try not to overthink it. That's my approach to... I probably come across like I don't think about it too much, but I put a lot of thought into who I want on the show. And then once I've got them, I'm like, well, it's going to go where it's going to go. So... that wasn't what you asked, but it was very quick. Don't overthink it. Just get stuck in, and you'll pick up the rest as you go. Because you don't want to be. I think Harley, you said it. Your first podcast shouldn't be your best. It should be like episode 100 when you've got everyone there, and it's a process too. If I'm listening to someone, they're going to improve, and I'm part of that. So.
I think every one of us will look back at our first or second podcast and go, "Oh God," but it's still up there,
I
would say that.
One thing that we have picked up, and Will was telling you about his very first podcast, but with the one with My Kiwi Life when we launched that, we were actually quite strategic around the content, around when we would launch what episode. With one of the other ones, we launched the New Zealand Motoring Podcast. The guys recorded the first episode, sent it in, and I said, no, you're going to be okay, but this isn't good enough to put out as a first episode. There is actually value in making sure your first episode is at least half decent, because what happens is you'll spread the word about this podcast. People will listen to one episode, and if it's really crap, they're not going to listen to any more. So yes, you just do want to get started, but try and produce something that's reasonable, and feel free to throw out your first episode or 2. We did with the Tech Podcast, the first one we didn't publish it, and I think that's just fine.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, the first time I thought about doing podcasting was I was listening to a podcast, Businesswomen. Can't even remember the name properly, but I got interviewed about our book, and I thought, I could do that, the Kiwi spirit. And so I did, but what I learnt before I started is the 6 weeks in iTunes are key, okay? So when you launch your podcast, they suggest you have at least 3 episodes that you launch on day 1, because if someone downloads your podcast and subscribes to it, they're not just downloading 1, they're downloading 3. So every time someone downloads or subscribes to your podcast, they're downloading 3, so it's more hits, which gets you up higher in iTunes, which gets you in the What's Hot, which is, I think I may have forgot to mention, but those reviews I got steadily over those 1.5 years, that always got me in What's Hot consistently for 1.5 years. So that's the, this is strategic to do. But I also had 1 month's worth of interviews in the bank. So they were edited, they were interviewed. And, when I was starting editing, and that took me 8 hours, and I over-edited and ruined some of my episodes by over-editing, unfortunately, but this is what we learn. And so, get the idea, prepare, get the questions that you want, borrow from different people's podcasts, make sure it's unique, and get at least 3. And because I wanted to make mine all about the guest, I actually just did 2 pretty much introductory kind of, this is what the Preachless is all about, kind of just a few minutes, because I don't know, I just want each episode of each guest to come out as just them. So
yeah. And Chris and Sam podcast started with Sam, who I met him at Social Media Club Hamilton. We'd have a beer afterwards and we'd just tell stories. That was pretty much all we did. And every time we met, and he says, we're going to do a project one day, and one day he came along and said, we're going to do a podcast. I'm like, okay. And so that was the Chris and Sam podcast. The New Zealand Filmmakers podcast came out of going to an event where there was a lot of filmmakers and they didn't know each other. And I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. This is in Hamilton. You know, it's not like Auckland and big and stuff. There's only a few of us here. We should at least all know each other. So we started out from that. So hopefully that answers your question. Last question.
Hi, thanks for the panel, guys. I was just wondering, have you ever had any trouble with a podcast interviewee opening up, and what do you do to help that podcast interviewee open up?
I did. I interviewed the Mad Butcher. Shout outs to Mad Butcher. I didn't realise that he's like my dad's age. I love my dad. And my dad gives very short answers. And when you're learning how to interview, it's difficult because you want them to talk. So I'd say, Peter, you know, what was it like being a kid? And he'd go, good. So I ran through all my questions in about 5 minutes and wrapped it up pretty quick and totally got overwhelmed and drove home and freaked out. But, you know, that's not going to happen all the time. So I figure you just make your intro reflect that. Say, hey man, I had a tough time in this interview, I'm learning. Here's my awkward chat with the Mad Butcher, you know? And it's pretty awkward. That's all. I think I was asking him about what was your first car? But, you know, that's the joy of it. We're all doing it for free, learning as we go. And as long as you acknowledge that and don't pretend you're got 20 years broadcasting experience, I think the audience will help you out.
Cool. Sarah?
What I actually had as the 2 first questions was to basically warm them up. So my first question was, what is your greatest joy as a parent? And so straight away, they're going to relax and think, oh, I really enjoy this about my kids. Okay, so they're relaxed. The second question is, what was your warmest childhood memory? And so that I think one of them said, oh, I didn't really have one. And so it's like, oh, okay, and then we moved on to the next one. But it's my structure, I had a set amount of questions and I'd modify them for the different guests because I'm a bit more, I like to have order. But I found asking a warm question to start with to just relax the guest, it really helped for me.
Do you want to add anything, Paul? No. Okay, I'll just say for the New Zealand Filmmakers podcast, it's really easy, I find, because I want to learn off this person. So I have a bunch of general questions that I want to know what they know. So the second interview particularly was a lawyer, entertainment industry lawyer. And so I'm like, what do you do? And then just don't be afraid to be dumb, come across stupid. Like, so how does that work? Or what is that? And if you ask those questions, I assume my listeners are going to appreciate that because not all of them will know those answers either. Some of them, I'm sure, Harley possibly listens to it and goes, dumbass. But, you know, there's a bunch of people that'll go, oh, I didn't know that either, and now I do. So if you ask those questions and bring it back down, because the more basic you make it, the more confident they feel because it's an easy question for them. Does that make sense? I hope that helps. Thank you all so much for being here. I want you to do something quickly. Tweet out to one of these guys, pick one and say thanks. Just whip out your phones because this is Social Media Club and if you haven't got a phone you shouldn't be here. Get on Twitter and just pick one of those, say thank you, and we have another slide in a second and you're going to do that with the other slide as well.
Can we mention?
Actually, oh yes, we will. All right, we'll do another page. Those are the other ones, so jump on to one of those as well. Asia Pac.
Yeah, so if anyone this evening's been a bit inspired about podcasts, maybe you already have a podcast or you want to launch a podcast, we are putting together the first Asia Pacific Podcasting Conference. It's going to be February 13th here in Auckland. We have the world's #1 podcasting coach who has graciously agreed that New Zealand is quite a nice place to visit and that he would like to come and speak, and he's going to be promoting it to his audience right around the region. So we're hoping we can get a few people in a room together, and that's February 13th. I haven't got it signed on paper yet, so I won't give out the name until we've done that. But he's pretty good. And if you're interested, go to podcast.co.nz. Just get on our list there, or drop me an email. And we will, for anyone that gets on there or drops me an email, paul.spain@podcast.nz, tonight you'll be in for, we'll get you a discount for any social media club people who would like to sign up once we announce the price over the next week.
Cool, that sounds good, thank you. All right, so please give a warm welcome, or thank you, rather, welcome, to our panel.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Chris.
And we'll really close it out.
May I just say thank you again all for coming along and putting up with boring technical things that I won't run into, but I'll be sure to cry on someone's shoulder later on. So, many things. Who knew that you could turn walls off and on? But now I do. Look, we have run a bit late today, so we need to let the security guard head home at about 8:30, but we've got the space till then. If you could please pick up bottles that you see around you and at least take them out to the front counter, that would help me out a great deal. The next social media club, sorry, one last thing. Next, we're going to take a break over summer now because everyone goes crazy with the silly season. So provisional date maybe February 17, if it follows the same pattern of third Wednesday, but sign up to the website that Julian has together at smcakl.com, and keep an eye out, and we'll be sure to update you as we figure out what's happening next year. Right, cool, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.